Welcome to the Pachara Talks. Today we are going to secure Azure container instances. Yes, this is the next topic in our security specialist syllabus. And today we are going to secure it. We are going to talk about all the best practices and possible services or resources that we could utilize in Azure to secure ACI or Azure Container Instances. So before we start talking about secure, just for the sake of this video, for the audience who are beginners and new and not following the channel from the beginning, so for them, a little bit, what is Azure Container Instance? Azure Container Instance is PaaS service, is uh, a lightweight, isolated environment to run containers in Azure without requiring you to manage underlying VMs because it's a PaaS service. So whenever you have your image and you want to deploy it, usually what happens? Usually you go ahead, you create the virtual network. If you are thinking for cloud, so first of all, you go and you create the virtual network. Okay. Why you need virtual network? Because you need to create a VM inside it. Why you want to create the VM? Because you need to deploy the Docker and then uh, run the images. That's how usually happens. So this is the IES structure where we need to manage and take care of this virtual machine as well. We need to provide the maintenance, we need to provide the patches, security for this VM as well, because this is also coming under our jurisdiction. This is not something which is taken care by Microsoft. But the purpose is, what is the purpose? Purpose is to run the image. That is the purpose. Our purpose is not to create a virtual network, maintain the VM, find a cloud engineer from the VM, uh, or a Docker engineer, but our purpose is to simply run the image. Our developers wants to run the image. So what is the solution for this kind of situation where we just need to go and run a simple image? The solution is, do not go through all kind of this headache or multiple steps. Just simply go ahead and spin up ACI. Spin up ACI. ACI is what? ACI is PaaS service. So what do you need to do? You simply need to go ahead on Azure portal, and you need to type Azure Container Instance in the search bar. I'm just trying to cover the dead air. Container instances right here. You need to click here. You need to click create container instance. All right. Oh no, seems like this got disabled again. I must have left some resources running. Anyways, the point is, what we need to create this container instances: the container name, the region, availability zone that is in preview, this queue, like where we want it to run. This is for the container group, like we can create multiple containers and run it. Okay. Now image, uh, we should go with the Azure Container Registry. It's a seamless integration. Both are Azure resources. We need to provide the image resource, then the image and the size of the container. That's all we need to give this information. We need not to go and create things from scratch. And if we go ahead under networking, it's all about public, private, and in advanced, it is all about the restart policies and environment variables and key management, things like that. So it is very simple PaaS service. Here you only need to provide the image with the size and you would have a running container. Okay. So I hope this container instance idea what it is clear now. We can simply go ahead and see couple of features before we start talking about securing it. Features like it supports Docker containers. Okay, so it support Docker containers, this particular service. Okay, and it starts in seconds. Once you just deploy it, just start running it, would not take even minutes, just like a virtual machine. It's very lightweight and instantly start uh, running. And it build by the second. You ran the container, and there is some task you wanted this container to be performed. It ran for like 5 minutes and it turned off. So you will be billed only for the 5 minute, which means it is very cost effective, right? Now we can also create this container as we showed you when we were trying to see here. Oh no, not this one, right here. If we go to networking, we can create public, we can create private, we can create none. Public means it would have public IP, could be accessible from outside, like from internet. Private, it will be inside the virtual network. Okay, so it can be any. We can deploy a container instance with an IP address and FQDN for containers that need to be accessible over the internet, that is public. And alternatively, we can deploy it in the virtual network, which is private ACI. So we have both the options here. Now, what if we need some kind of storage? Can we attach it? Yes, ACI supports mounting Azure file share as volume. So we can mount it. So we can also utilize the storage, making it easy to persist data even after the container instance is deleted. Yes, it will be there. What about if you want to embed some kind of variables, environment variables? If you remember the ACI I showed you, we can have that option under advanced. So the answer is yes, we can pass the environment variables, which can be used to configure the application at the runtime. All right, so we can also create more than one container, and that will become your container group. That is also possible. Okay, and what else? There is one more thing, which is something important I should mention here, is ACI does not provide any kind of orchestration. That's the reason, because I mentioned container group, which more or less seems like orchestration because we have multiple containers. But no, it does not provide any orchestration like AKS does. Okay. So what it means, all these are the features that we have. It seems like a simple service, simple container image that can run instantaneously. No need to do any kind of other IAS workload spinning up and things like that. So the question comes, this is all clear. We understood what is ACI now. We understood all those features that it provide. But what problem it is solving, what purpose it is solving, how it is helping us, or where we can use it. So there are certain tasks that can easily be performed by this kind of service, like batch processing. Okay, because we want to quickly run batch jobs that require processing large volumes of data in short amount of time. And AC and ACI can rapidly deploy containers that perform tasks like image or data processing and then terminate once the job is completed. And you will be billed only by the second you run the ACI. So ACI is a good resource to serve this purpose, because it allow for on-demand burst processing without needing a full container orchestration platform like Kubernetes, and this can reduce cost and complexity for short-lived task. Okay, good. Then, if we think for event-driven application, it can help us to execute small piece of code in response to events, just like Azure functions. Of course, you can think for that as well, but this particular ACI can also solve this purpose. event driven applications. Now, if you're wondering when to use ACI, if you have particular kind of requirement, like you are going to use a particular language which is not supported by function and things like that, you can use this. So, for instance, processing files as soon as they are uploaded to Azure Blob Storage or handling webhooks received from a third-party service. So, ACI can handle it, and containers can be launched as the trigger happens, just like functions, and it will quickly in response to events, and you only pay for the compute seconds that it uses. So integration with Azure Logic Apps or Azure Functions can facilitate event-driven architectures as well. Okay, so all these services, like I mentioned, functions, Logic App, and then batch and this ACI, can solve this event-driven application architecture. But do you need to find out what is the right choice for you? This is one of the use case for the ACI. Okay, and now this is a lightweight. We all know about the Docker images, and so what we can do, we can host lightweight web application or APIs in a container. So web app or APIs in a container. This is suitable to applications with low to moderate traffic or for deploying test environment. Let's put it this way, because ACI provides hassle-free way to deploy web applications without managing underlying infrastructure that we have already established, and it supports both Linux and Windows containers, making it versatile for different application needs. Since I mentioned dev and test environment, I should put it here in a separate dev test environment, which is the most used ACI service under this use case, because it quickly spin up and tear down development or test environments. Developers can use ACI to deploy containers that mirror production environments without impacting the production resources. With ACI, environments can be created and destroyed on demand, less money, less cost, helping to keep cost low, ensuring that resources are used efficiently. And then these are some use cases I was thinking. Yeah, that you could have more use cases. This is not like all, but yeah, these are some situations where we can easily use ACI. Okay, now it's time to think for these are some use cases. Now let's talk about situation where we should opt for ACI. Okay, these are the use cases. Now we are thinking, when should we opt for ACI over any other service? Because it is also running container, AKS also run container, container apps run the container, and if you have your own setup, then it runs the container. So if you have a situation where no overhead of orchestration, if you don't need the full capabilities of an orchestrator like Kubernetes and want to avoid managing VMs or server clusters, and you have images to run, ACI offers a simple alternative. So no overhead of orchestration. You can opt for ACI, or I should mention here, highlight it. Uh, when to opt for ACI. Okay, in such situation, you can opt for ACI. Then for workloads that don't run continuously, the example of batch processing, ACI can be more cost effective than maintaining a VM or Kubernetes service, as you only pay for the exact time your container are running and no overhead to maintain anything. So uh, sporadic uses. What if, or we can say on demand or ad hoc. Anyways, then when you need to quickly prototype or deploy application without the hassle of setting of underlying infrastructure, and that your particular microservice, maybe you want to just test it, or your application is containerized, so you can do that. So rapid prototyping before you put it in the production environment. And for applications that require rapid scaling in response to burst of on demand and then need to scale down quickly, so you can use for that simple web application API, the third use case we talked about. Right. So and again, short-lived task, I could say. that we have virtual queue as AKS can utilize this. Just an example, as virtual node, this ACI, which quickly creates and takes care of a short-lived task. Okay. Then when application requires strong isolation and security, but don't require the complexity of a full Kubernetes deployment, so simplified structure or architecture and less security. So it's a simple setup. Okay. All right. So these are few things that we needed to understand so that when we start talking about it, we have pretty good idea what we are going to talk about. So what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about how we can secure ACI. Now, here is the virtual network and here is your subscription. This is your subscription, Azure subscription. Okay. So we have created the ACI and the VM. Now, whenever we have ACI, it is getting images from somewhere, right? So it is getting images from ACR. Let's call it ACR. Okay, so what happened? This guy, this guy, when we have image to run, get the image from ACR, and then it trained, and we have the ACI, the URL. Okay. Now this is a simple setup, as you can see. Now let's try to secure it. So what we are going to do? We are securing now, securing ACI. All those resources that we have, and we will help us to secure our ACI. So the very first thing, whenever we have any setup related to Docker container images, we should have image security. Okay. And how can we make sure it is secure? The very first thing is use trusted base image. Do not just use from any unknown source. Always use official or verified images from trusted registries. And trusted images reduce the risk of vulnerabilities and malicious code into your environment. Regular updates help mitigate newly discovered security vulnerabilities. Okay, then you need to scan scan your images continuously. Okay, scan images. How can you do that? You can utilize tools like MS Defender for containers, right? Which continuously scan the images in the Azure Container Registry, or you could utilize third-party tools to scan container images for vulnerabilities before deployment. Ensure that images are kept up to date with the latest security patches. Regularly scanning helps identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities before they can exploit it. So it's crucial for maintaining a security integrity of your containerized application. So I should make one more point here, third point, which is patched or up to date security patches. So this is all about images. Now our image is secure. We get that image and start running. Running where? In our ACI. So what we need to do, we now need to secure the network. How we can secure the networking? Well, there are multiple ways, as we have already talked about. What we talked about? We talked about public and private ACI. We talked about AC contain. It can be created inside the virtual network. It can have a public IP address, or it can be inside the virtual network. So what is the best practice if you need to secure? We should isolating container instances within virtual network. This is the best practice. It will prevent unauthorized access and limits potential lateral movement within your infrastructure. And we can utilize VNet. I should write here. Then we should have NSGs, and it also supports firewall. Not firewall. Okay, which provide granular control over traffic, enhancing the security posture. All right, then once the networking is set up, now what would be the next point? because once the networking is set up, somebody has to access it, or ACI will be accessing somebody. So it's all about authentication and access control. Authentication and access control. So regarding authentication, we should use managed identities. Okay, because managed identities for Azure resources, we should enable managed identities for Azure resources on our ACI to securely access other Azure services without storing credentials in the code. Because in all these examples, it is all the use cases that we talked about. ACI is talking to other Azure services, like for batch processing, it is talking to the storage account. For event driven, it is again talking to some of the services. So it can securely access other Azure services without storing the credentials in code. So it is secure. Managed identities eliminate the need for storing sensitive credentials in your configuration, reducing the risk of credential leakage. Hence, enable managed identities. And this is the authentication. What about the uh, access control? Well, that would be RBAC, which means use RBAC with least privileged principle to control who can manage your ACIs, your Azure admins, or whosoever has the access on the Azure. All right, fine. Now we have the networking, our container is running, and we have the authentication done, access control done. Now, what about the next point? Well, whatever we are running inside, okay, that should not contain any sensitive data, which means avoid passing sensitive data like password or API keys through environment variables. Use Azure Key Vault, which means you need to secure environment variables by using Key Vault. And again, RBAC comes in the picture. So use Azure Key Vault to manage secret and access them securely in your containers. Storing secrets outside of your containers minimize the risk of exposure in case of security breaches. And Azure Key Vault provides a centralized and secure store which can be audited and controlled tightly. Finally, everything is taken care of, from image to access to networking to all those environmental variables. Now the most important thing is logging and monitoring. Yes, we should always focus about logging and monitoring. So why? Because monitoring and logging enable you to detect and respond to potential security incidents promptly. Azure Monitor provides insights into application performance and health, facilitating effective troubleshooting and operational excellence. So use Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics to monitor the health and activity of your container instances. Enable diagnostic settings to send logs and metrics to Azure Logs for analysis. So we can say Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and diagnostic settings, auditing log. These things we should enable. And we already talked about regularly update the container images to include the latest security patches, automate the process of rebuilding and redeploying containers when base image or dependencies are updated. That could be another good point I think I should mention here. Automate the process as soon as base image or dependencies updated. Okay. Finally, everything is running. All these things are in place. We can still think of one more thing. If it is a, uh, in particular, if it is a publicly accessible ACI, the public IP it has, then you must deploy Azure Application Gateway with WAF in front of your container instance to protect against common web vulnerabilities, because WEF provides an additional layer of security by blocking malicious web traffic and common exploits like SQL injection and cross-site scripting, thereby protecting your application from web-based attacks. So WEF could be utilized for those kind of ACIs. So with this, I think we have covered almost everything regarding ACI. We get familiar ourselves with the ACI, what all it does, why we should use it, all the use cases, then in what situation we should opt for it. Then finally, we talked about 9 points to secure ACI with all the best practices. I hope it was informative and you guys liked it. Well, thank you for watching and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye bye.